She stood in a line like livestock while men walked past, choosing wives the way they'd pick horses. One by one, women disappeared into new lives. But Lian Yue? She remained. Too quiet. Too foreign. Too invisible. The laughter started, cruel, cutting. Then a voice broke through the crowd. If no one wants her, I do. The rancher who spoke wasn't kind, wasn't gentle. He was broken, haunted, desperate. And she? She was about to walk into a life that would demand everything she had. If you want to see how a woman nobody wanted became the one nobody could replace, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The sun beat down on Ridgemont like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dirt streets into ribbons of pale dust that clung to everything. Boots, skirts, skin. It was the kind of heat that made people mean, made them short with their words and quick with their judgment. The kind of heat that made a spectacle feel even crueler. Lian Yu stood in that heat, third from the end of a line of women who'd traveled west on promises that ranged from half-true to outright lies. Mail-order brides, they called them, though the term made it sound cleaner than it was. Transactional, desperate. A solution to loneliness that benefited men more than it did the women who stepped off those wagons with nothing but a single bag and a heart full of hope they were too smart to admit to. She'd stopped hoping 2 towns ago. Her dress was plain, gray cotton, mended at the sleeves, the hem dusty from weeks of travel. Her hair, black as coal, was pulled back tight in a braid that hung down her back. No ribbons, no curls, no effort to be anything other than what she was. A woman with narrow shoulders, a serious face, and eyes that didn't beg for anything. Around her, the other women fidgeted. They smoothed their skirts, pinched their cheeks for color, whispered to each other in voices that trembled with nerves and something close to excitement. They were younger, most of them. Prettier, if you listened to the men. Louder, definitely. They knew how to smile in that way that made men feel like they'd already won something. Lian Yue didn't smile. She watched. The men came forward one by one, walking down the line with the kind of casual scrutiny you'd give a plow horse. They looked at faces, at hands, at the way a woman held herself. Some asked questions. Most didn't bother. A nod, a few words to the man running the operation, a greasy fellow named Hutchins who smelled like tobacco and talked too much. And it was done. A woman would step forward, shake hands with her new husband, and disappear into a future she couldn't predict. By the time the 4th woman was chosen, Lian Yue knew she wouldn't be. She'd seen the way their eyes skipped over her, paused for a half-second, maybe, then moved on like she was part of the scenery. She wasn't what they wanted, too quiet, too foreign. Her English was good, better than some of the men doing the choosing, but her accent marked her as other, and in a place like this, other was the same as wrong. The woman next to her, a blonde named Sadie with a laugh like broken glass, leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, honey, someone will pick you." Lian Yue didn't answer. Sadie was chosen 2 minutes later by a man with a thick beard and a farm 20 miles north. She left with a wave and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then it was just Lian Yue and 2 others. The sun climbed higher. The crowd grew restless. Hutchins mopped his forehead with a stained handkerchief and started talking faster, his voice taking on the edge of a man trying to sell something nobody wanted. "Now, gentlemen, don't let the day go to waste. Fine women, all of them, strong, capable. Any one of these ladies would make a good wife, a good helpmate." "She speak English?" someone called out, pointing at Lian Yue. "Better than you," she said, her voice flat. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, but it wasn't the kind that included her. It was the kind that made her the joke. Hutchins shot her a look that could have curdled milk. "Yes, she speaks English, reads and writes it too. Came all the way from it." "Don't matter where she came from," another man interrupted. "She ain't what I'm looking for." "Me neither. Too thin. Too plain." The words came easy, careless, like they were talking about the weather. Lian Yue stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her, her face giving nothing away. Inside, though, something old and familiar settled into her chest. The weight of being unwanted, the sting of it. She'd carried it before. She could carry it again. One of the other women started crying. Quiet, at first. Then louder when she realized no one was coming for her. Hutchins put a hand on her shoulder, muttering something that was probably meant to be comforting but came out annoyed. Lian Yue didn't cry. She looked past the crowd, past the buildings that lined the street, out toward the open land beyond. Endless. Empty. Exactly like the future she was staring down. The last woman was chosen by a man who looked twice her age and smelled like whiskey. That left Lian Yue alone. Hutchins cleared his throat. All right, gentlemen, we've got one left. Now, I know she ain't flashy, but she's hard-working, and she don't complain. I'll take her. The voice cut through Hutchins' pitch like a knife through cotton. Deep, rough. The kind of voice that didn't ask for attention but got it anyway. The crowd turned. So did Lian Yue. The man who'd spoken stood at the edge of the gathering, half in shadow from the building behind him. He was tall, taller than most of the men there, with shoulders that looked like they'd carried more than their share of weight. His clothes were worn but clean, a faded blue shirt, dark trousers, boots that had seen years of use. His hat was pulled low, but she could see his face well enough. Hard angles, a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of stone, eyes that didn't give anything away. He wasn't young, wasn't old, somewhere in the middle with the kind of weariness that came from living, not years. Hutchins blinked. You, Caleb Hale? You're taking her? That a problem? Caleb's voice didn't rise, but there was something in it that made Hutchins step back. No problem. Just didn't think you were looking for... I wasn't. Caleb started walking forward, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust with each step. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at Hutchins. He looked at Lian Yue. She met his eyes and didn't flinch. He stopped a few feet away. You got a name? Lian Yue. Lian Yu? Close enough. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You know what you're signing up for? Do you? She asked. That got a reaction. His eyes narrowed, but not in anger, more like he was trying to figure her out and wasn't sure he could. Fair question, he said after a moment. He turned to Hutchins. What do I owe you? Hutchins stammered out a number. Caleb pulled a worn billfold from his pocket, counted out bills, and handed them over without a word. The transaction was done in seconds. No ceremony, no congratulations. Caleb looked back at Lian Yue. You got belongings? She held up a single canvas bag. That it? That's it. He nodded once. Wagons this way. He turned and started walking, didn't wait to see if she'd follow. Lian Yue glanced back at Hutchins, who was stuffing the money into his coat with hands that shook slightly. He didn't meet her eyes. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder and followed Caleb Hale into whatever came next. The wagon was older than God and twice as creaky. The wood was sun-bleached and splintered in places, the wheels held together with what looked like hope and determination. 2 horses stood hitched to the front, workhorses, big and patient, their coats dull from dust and heat. Caleb climbed up onto the driver's seat without offering her a hand. Lian Yue climbed up herself. He didn't comment. The reins snapped, and the horses started forward, pulling the wagon out of town at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow, just steady, determined. They rode in silence. Lian Yue watched the town fall away behind them, replaced by open land that stretched out in every direction, dry grass, scrub brush, the occasional twisted tree. The sky was enormous, pale blue and endless, the kind of sky that made you feel small whether you wanted to or not. She didn't mind feeling small. After what felt like an hour, Caleb spoke. You run off. I won't come looking. She glanced at him. His eyes were on the road ahead, his jaw set. I won't run, she said. Most do. I'm not most. He looked at her then, just for a second. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or doubt. We'll see, he said. More silence. The land changed gradually. The flatness gave way to gentle rises and falls, the dry grass thickening in places, thinning in others. In the distance, Lian Yue could see the dark shapes of cattle scattered across the hills like seeds thrown by a careless hand. That your land? She asked. Some of it. How much? Enough? She didn't push. Another hour passed. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Lian Yue had the energy to care. She didn't. She was tired, bone-tired, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. Finally, the ranch came into view. It wasn't much. A house, single story, built from wood that had weathered to a dull gray, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, a chicken coop, a well, fences that needed mending. Everything looked functional but worn, like it had been built with care once and then forgotten. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down. This time, he offered her a hand. She took it. His grip was rough, calloused, strong. He held on just long enough to steady her, then let go. "This is it," he said. Lian Yue looked at the house. "All right. You were expecting more?" "I wasn't expecting anything." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Come on." He led her up the steps to the front door, which opened with a groan of protest. Inside, the house was dim and smelled faintly of dust and old smoke. The main room was sparse. A table, a few chairs, a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in months. Everything was clean enough, but there was a lifelessness to the place, like it was waiting for something it didn't believe would come. "Boys should be back soon," Caleb said, taking off his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "They're out checking the fence line." "Boys?" "My sons." His voice flattened on the word. "Ethan's 14. Sam's 9. Lian Yue nodded slowly. "Their mother?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Dead." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and final. "I'm sorry," Lian Yue said. "Don't be. You didn't know her." Still, he looked at her, and for the first time she saw something other than blankness in his eyes. Pain, maybe. Or anger. Hard to tell. "You'll sleep in there," he said, nodding toward a door on the left. "Used to be a storage room. I cleared it out. There's a bed, a chest, not much else." "It's fine. Boys have the room on the right. I'm in the back." "All right." He crossed the room, opened a cabinet, and pulled out a tin cup and a bottle of something dark. He poured a measure into the cup, drank it in one swallow, then set the cup down harder than necessary. "You eat yet?" he asked. "Not since morning." He nodded. "I'll make something." "I can do it." "You just got here." "And I can still cook." He looked like he was about to argue, then thought better of it. "Suit yourself. Kitchen's through there." He gestured toward a doorway at the back of the room. "Fire's low, but there's wood out back." Lian Yue set her bag down by the door to her new room and walked into the kitchen. It was small, functional. A cast iron stove, a counter, shelves stocked with the basics. Flour, salt, a few cans. Not much, but enough. She got to work. By the time the boys came home, the smell of fried bread and beans filled the house. Lian Yue heard them before she saw them, boots on the porch, voices low and tired. The door opened and they stepped inside, bringing the smell of sweat and dust with them. They stopped when they saw her. The older one, Ethan, was all sharp edges and suspicion. He had his father's build, tall for his age, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a mouth set in a permanent scowl. He looked at Lian Yue like she was a problem he hadn't asked for. The younger one, Sam, was smaller, quieter. His face was rounder, still holding on to the softness of childhood, but his eyes were old, too old. He didn't look at Lian Yue so much as past her, like she wasn't entirely real. Caleb appeared from the back room, his face unreadable. "Boys, this is Lian Yue. She'll be staying." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Staying?" "That's what I said." "For how long?" "Long as she wants." Ethan's jaw clenched. "We didn't ask for this." "I didn't ask you." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Sam shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between his father and his brother. Len Yu set the last plate on the table and turned to face them. "Dinner's ready. You should eat while it's hot." Ethan stared at her. "We don't need—" "Sit down," Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. Ethan's hands balled into fists, but he sat. So did Sam. Caleb took a seat at the head of the table. Lian Yue sat across from the boys. The meal was silent, except for the scrape of forks on plates. Ethan ate like he was angry at the food. Sam ate like he was afraid it would disappear. Caleb ate like he was feeding a machine that needed fuel, nothing more. Lian Yue ate slowly, watching them without making it obvious. This was her life now, this house, these people, this silence that felt less like peace and more like a wound that hadn't healed. When the plates were empty, Ethan pushed back from the table and stood. I'm going to bed. Clean your plate first, Caleb said. I'll do it in the morning. You'll do it now. Ethan's eyes flashed, but he grabbed his plate and took it to the kitchen. The sound of water splashing was louder than it needed to be. Sam stood quietly, took his plate, and followed his brother without a word. That left Lian Yue and Caleb. He looked at her across the table. They'll come around. Will they? Maybe. And if they don't? He didn't answer. Lian Yue stood, gathered the remaining plates, and carried them to the kitchen. Ethan was already gone, the back door slamming shut behind him. Sam stood at the counter, washing his plate with careful, deliberate movements. She set the plates down beside him. I can finish. He flinched just slightly, then shook his head. It's okay. His voice was small, fragile. Lian Yue didn't push. She stepped back and let him work. When he was done, he dried his hands on a towel and looked at her for the first time. Really looked. Are you going to leave? He asked. The question caught her off guard. Why would I leave? Everyone does. I'm not everyone. He studied her with those two old eyes, then nodded once. Okay. He walked past her and disappeared into his room. Lian Yu stood alone in the kitchen, the weight of the day settling over her like a heavy blanket. She was tired, so tired. But she couldn't sleep yet. There was too much to do, too much to understand. She finished the dishes, wiped down the counter, and checked the stove. Then she walked to her room, the storage room that was now hers, and closed the door behind her. The space was small, a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a wooden chest at the foot, a single window that looked out onto the dark expanse of land beyond. She sat on the bed and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. This was her life now, and she had no idea if she'd survive it. The days that followed were hard in ways Lian Yue hadn't expected. Not the work. She was used to work. She'd been working since she was old enough to hold a broom, scrubbing floors and washing clothes and cooking meals for people who barely saw her. Work didn't scare her. It was the silence. The house was full of it. A silence that wasn't peaceful but suffocating, like everyone was holding their breath and waiting for something to break. Caleb left at dawn and came back after dark, his face lined with exhaustion and something heavier. He spoke only when necessary, short, clipped sentences that left no room for conversation. He wasn't cruel, wasn't kind. He was just absent. A man going through the motions of living without actually being alive. Ethan was worse. He avoided her like she carried a disease. If she entered a room, he left. If she spoke, he ignored her. On the rare occasions he had to acknowledge her existence, he did it with a look that made it clear she wasn't welcome. Sam was different. He didn't avoid her, but he didn't engage either. He watched her the way a stray dog watches a stranger, curious but wary, ready to run at the first sign of danger. He ate the food she cooked, nodded when she spoke. But he never smiled, never relaxed. Lian Yu didn't push. She cleaned. The house was a mess in ways that weren't immediately obvious. The floors were swept but not scrubbed. The windows were intact but filthy. The corners of rooms held dust that had settled so long it had become part of the structure. She started with the main room, moved the furniture, scrubbed the floors until her hands ached, washed the windows until light actually came through them. She found a broom with half its bristles missing and used it anyway. Found rags that were more whole than fabric and made them work. No one thanked her. No one noticed. She kept going. The kitchen was next. She reorganized the shelves, threw out food that had gone bad, scrubbed the stove until the iron gleamed. She found a crack in one of the water jugs and patched it with wax, found a loose board in the floor, and hammered it back into place with a rock because there were no proper tools. She cooked every night. Simple meals, beans, bread, whatever vegetables she could coax from the sad little garden out back. The boys ate without comment. Caleb ate without looking up. She told herself it didn't matter. It mattered. 2 weeks in, something shifted. Lian Yue was in the garden, pulling weeds from between rows of half-dead tomato plants when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Sam stood a few feet away, holding a bucket. Pa said to bring you water, he said. She wiped her hands on her skirt and took the bucket. Thank you. He nodded, then hesitated. You fixing the garden? Trying. Ma used to grow tomatoes. It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother without being prompted. Lian Yu set the bucket down carefully. Did she teach you? He shook his head. I was too little. You're not too little now. He looked at the plants, then at her. You think they'll grow? I don't know, but we can try. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or the memory of it. Okay, he said. He didn't leave. For the next hour, they worked side by side in silence. Sam pulled weeds. Lian Yue watered the plants and checked the soil. It wasn't much, but it was something. When the sun started to set, Sam stood and brushed the dirt off his hands. I gotta help Ethan with the fence. All right. He started to walk away, then stopped and looked back. The garden looks better. Lian Yue smiled, just a little. Thank you, Sam. He didn't smile back, but his face softened. It was enough. That night, Ethan slammed his plate down so hard it cracked. What the hell is this? He demanded, glaring at the food. Dinner, Lian Yue said calmly. It's the same thing we had last night. Because it's what we have. Then get something else. With what money? Ethan's face went red. Don't talk to me like I'm stupid. I'm not. I'm telling you the truth. Caleb, who'd been silent up until then, set down his fork. That's enough, Ethan. She's not Ma, Ethan spat. She'll never be Ma. The words hit the table like a punch. Sam went pale. Caleb's jaw tightened. Lian Yue didn't flinch. You're right, she said quietly. I'm not your mother. I'm not trying to be. Then what are you doing here? Ethan's voice cracked, and for a second she saw past the anger to the grief underneath. Why'd he bring you here? Because he needed help. We don't need you. Maybe not, but I'm here anyway. Ethan shoved back from the table and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Sam stared at his plate, his hands trembling. Caleb rubbed his face with one hand, looking older than he had that morning. Lian Yue stood and started clearing the dishes. Leave it, Caleb said. It needs to be done. I said leave it. She stopped, looked at him. His eyes were dark, haunted. He's not wrong. This wasn't fair to any of you. Life's not fair. That doesn't make it right. No, Lian Yue said, but it's what we have. She picked up the plates and carried them to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Caleb pour another drink. The breaking point came a month later. Lian Yue woke to the sound of shouting. She threw on her robe and ran into the main room. Caleb was standing in the doorway, Sam clutched in his arms, the boy's face burning red with fever. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the room, his eyes wide with terror. What happened? Lian Yue demanded. He was fine this morning, Caleb said, his voice shaking. Then he collapsed. Sam's body convulsed, and he cried out, a sound that tore through the house like a blade. Lian Yue moved without thinking. Put him on the table, she ordered. Caleb hesitated. Now! He laid Sam down. The boy's skin was burning, his breathing shallow and ragged. Lian Yue pressed her hand to his forehead and felt her stomach drop. She'd seen this before. Get me cold water, she said. And cloth. As much as you have. Caleb didn't move. Caleb! He snapped out of it and ran. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, his face ashen. Is he gonna... Not if I can help it, Lian Yue said. But I need you to stay calm. I can't. Yes, you can. She looked him in the eye. Your brother needs you. Be strong for him. Something in her voice cut through his panic. He nodded, swallowing hard. Caleb returned with water and rags. Lian Yue soaked the cloth and pressed it to Sam's forehead, his neck, his wrists. The boy whimpered, his eyes fluttering but not opening. What is it? Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Fever. Bad one. Like, he couldn't finish. Like your wife? Lian Yue asked. He nodded. Then we fight harder. For 3 days and 3 nights, Lian Yue didn't sleep. She stayed by Sam's side, changing the wet cloths, forcing water between his lips, whispering to him in a language he didn't understand but seemed to calm him anyway. Caleb hovered nearby, useless and terrified. Ethan sat in the corner, his knees pulled to his chest, watching. On the 3rd night, Sam's fever broke. His eyes opened. Ma? He whispered. Lian Yue's breath caught. Then Sam blinked and focused. Saw her. Lian? She smiled, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I'm here. He reached for her hand. She took it, and across the room she saw Ethan bury his face in his hands and cry. Sam recovered slowly. For the first week after the fever broke, he slept more than he was awake, his small body exhausted from the fight it had waged against the sickness. Lian Yue stayed close, bringing him broth when he could stomach it, water when he couldn't, and cool cloths when the ghost of the fever tried to creep back in. She didn't leave him alone, not because she thought the illness would return, but because she'd seen the look in his eyes when he'd first woken up, that split second of confusion when he'd called for his mother and found someone else instead. The grief in that moment had been raw enough to cut, and Lian Yue knew better than to let a child sit alone with that kind of pain. Caleb watched from doorways, his presence constant but silent. He'd pull a chair up sometimes, sit for an hour without saying a word, then leave as quietly as he'd come. His face had changed in those 3 days of crisis. The lines had deepened, the shadows under his eyes had darkened, and something in his expression had shifted from haunted to something closer to desperate gratitude. He still didn't say much, but he started looking at her differently. Ethan was the real surprise. The morning after Sam's fever broke, Lian Yue had been dozing in the chair beside the bed when she heard footsteps. She'd opened her eyes to find Ethan standing in the doorway, his arms full of firewood. "For the stove," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "Thought you might need it." He'd set the wood down by the fireplace and left before she could respond. The next day he'd brought more wood without being asked. The day after that, he'd fixed the broken hinge on the kitchen cabinet, the one that had been hanging crooked since Lian Yue had arrived. He still didn't talk to her, still kept his distance, but the hostility had dulled, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Lian Yue didn't push him. She just nodded when he brought the wood, thanked him when he fixed things, and gave him the space he needed to figure out whatever was happening inside his head. By the second week, Sam was strong enough to sit up for longer stretches. His appetite came back, not all at once, but in slow increments. First broth, then bread soaked in broth, then actual bread with butter. Lian Yue cooked him eggs when the chickens cooperated, sweetened his water with a precious spoonful of honey when his throat was sore. "You don't have to keep doing this," Sam said one afternoon, his voice still raspy. "I'm okay now." Lian Yue set down the bowl of soup she'd been holding and looked at him. "I know." "Then why?" "Because I want to." He studied her face, searching for something. "Ethan said you stayed awake the whole time. 3 days. Your brother talks too much. He said you wouldn't let Pa send for the doctor. Said you knew what to do." Lian Yu's hand stilled. The truth was, she hadn't known what to do. Not exactly. She'd just remembered the fever that had swept through her village years ago. Remembered the old woman who'd fought it with cold water and patience and sheer stubbornness. She'd tried the same things and hoped like hell they'd work. "I did what I could," she said simply. Sam was quiet for a moment. Then, "He also said you cried when I woke up. Your brother definitely talks too much." A small smile tugged at the corner of Sam's mouth. It was the first smile she'd seen from him, and it lasted maybe 2 seconds before it disappeared. But it had been there. Real. "Thank you," he said quietly. Lian Yue reached out and squeezed his hand. "You're welcome." That afternoon, Sam fell asleep sitting up, his head tilted back against the pillow, his breathing deep and even. Lian Yue was pulling the blanket up over him when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Caleb stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "He looks better," he said. "He is better." Caleb nodded, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't know how to say. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I owe you." "You don't." "I do. If you hadn't—" He stopped, his voice catching. "He would have died. Just like she did." Lian Yu stood and crossed the room until she was close enough to see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "But he didn't die. He's here. He's safe. Because of you. Because he's strong." Caleb's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something other than walls. She saw a man who'd been holding himself together with spit and denial, and who'd just realized how close he'd come to losing everything. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice low. "Do what?" "Any of it. Be a father. Run this place. Keep them safe." He looked down at his hat, turning it over in his hands. I thought I could just keep moving, keep working. That if I worked hard enough, it wouldn't matter that I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Does anyone know what they're doing? Lian Yue asked. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't sounded so tired. You seem to. I'm just doing the next thing in front of me, same as you. Yeah, but you're good at it. Lian Yue thought about all the times she'd scrubbed floors until her hands bled, cooked meals with ingredients she'd had to stretch too thin, patched clothes that were more patched than cloth. She thought about the night she'd lain awake, wondering if she'd made the right choice coming here, if she'd survived this place, if these people would ever stop looking at her like she was temporary. I'm not good at it, she said. I'm just stubborn. That got a real smile out of him. Small, brief, but real. Stubborn, he repeated. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. He left soon after, but something between them had shifted. The distance was still there, but it felt less like a wall and more like the space two people needed to figure out how to stand next to each other without flinching. By the third week, Sam was out of bed. He moved slowly at first, his legs shaky from disuse, but he refused to stay in the room any longer. Lian Yue let him sit at the table while she cooked, let him help her fold the laundry even though his hands were clumsy, and he had to rest every few minutes. You're worse than a warden, he grumbled one afternoon when she made him sit down after he'd been standing for all of 5 minutes. And you're worse than a stubborn goat, he grinned. Ethan says I get it from Pa. Ethan's not wrong. The door opened and Ethan walked in, his shirt streaked with dirt and his hair sticking up in every direction. He stopped when he saw Sam sitting at the table. You're up, he said. Yeah. Ethan crossed the room and dropped into a chair like his legs had given out. You feel okay? Better than yesterday. Good. Ethan looked at Lian Yu, then away. Thanks for the breakfast this morning. It was good. It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything. You're welcome, Lian Yu said carefully. Ethan nodded and stood, heading for the water bucket. He drank straight from the ladle, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Sam watched him with an expression Lian Yue couldn't quite read. You fixed the fence? Most of it. Still got the south side to do. I can help. No, you can't, Ethan and Lian Yue said at the same time. Sam scowled. I'm fine. You can barely stand for 10 minutes, Ethan said. You're not hauling fence posts. I could hold the wire. No. You're being stupid. You're being stupider. Lian Yue cleared her throat. Both of you are being stupid. Sam, you're staying inside until you can walk to the barn and back without needing a nap. Ethan, stop arguing with him before you give me a headache. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Sam, who was grinning, and shook his head. Fine. Whatever. But there was no heat in it. He grabbed a piece of bread from the counter and headed back outside, the door swinging shut behind him. Sam looked at Lian Yue. He's not as mean as he acts. I know. He's just scared. I know that too. Sam picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. He was really scared when I got sick. I heard him talking to Pa. He thought I was going to die. Lian Yue sat down across from him. You didn't. I know. But I think it reminded him of when Ma died. He was there when it happened. I was too little. But Ethan remembers. That's a hard thing to carry. Yeah. Sam looked up at her. Do you think he'll ever stop being mad? At who? Everyone. The world. I don't know. Lian Yue thought about the way Ethan moved through the house like he was bracing for impact, the way his shoulders stayed tense even when he was sitting down, the way he flinched every time Sam coughed. I think he'll stop when he's ready, she said. You can't rush that kind of thing. What if he's never ready? Then we give him time anyway. Sam nodded slowly like he was working through something in his head. Then he stood, wobbly but determined, and headed for his room. Lian Yue watched him go, then turned back to the stove. The days blurred together after that. Sam grew stronger. His color came back, his energy returned, and within a month he was running around the ranch like nothing had happened. He followed Lian Yue everywhere, into the garden, to the chicken coop, down to the creek when she went to fetch water. He talked more, too. Asked questions about where she'd come from, what her life had been like before, if she missed home. She answered the ones she could and deflected the ones she couldn't. Ethan stayed distant, but the edges of his anger softened. He still didn't talk much, still kept his guard up, but he stopped leaving rooms when she entered, started eating dinner without complaint, fixed things around the house without being asked. One evening, Lian Yue was mending a tear in one of Sam's shirts when Ethan walked in and dropped a chair next to her. "That chair's been wobbly for weeks," he said. She looked up. The chair he'd been sitting in at dinner, the one that rocked every time he moved, was now sitting solid and still. "You fixed it," she said. "Yeah. Thank you," he shrugged. "Just needed a nail." He started to leave, then paused. "The garden's looking better, too." Lian Yue set down the shirt. "Sam's been helping." "I know. He won't shut up about it." Ethan's mouth twitched. "Says you're teaching him how to grow things. He's a good learner." Ethan nodded, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Ma used to do that. Teach him stuff. She was good at it." It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother without anger bleeding into his voice. "She sounds like she was a good person," Lian Yue said carefully. "She was." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She deserved better than this place." "Maybe, but she chose it anyway." He looked at her sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means people stay in hard places for reasons that matter to them. Your mother stayed because she loved your father and you boys. That was her choice." Ethan's eyes burned. "And what's your reason?" "For what?" "For staying. You could leave any time. No one's keeping you here." Lian Yue met his gaze without flinching. "I stay because I choose to." "That's not a reason." "It's the only one I've got." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head and walked out. But the next morning he made coffee without being asked. It was terrible, weak and bitter. But Lian Yue drank it anyway. Caleb noticed the changes too. He came home earlier now, spent more time in the house instead of hiding in the barn or out on the range. He talked more. Not a lot, but enough that the silence didn't feel so suffocating. He asked Sam about his day, asked Ethan about the work that needed doing, asked Lian Yue if she needed anything from town. One night, after the boys had gone to bed, Caleb poured himself a drink and sat down at the table across from her. "You've been here almost 3 months," he said. Lian Yue looked up from the sock she was darning. "Has it been that long?" "Feels longer." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that a complaint?" "No." He took a sip, then set the glass down. "It's just different. The house, the boys, everything." "Different how?" He thought about it. "It feels like people live here again." Lian Yu's hand stilled. "It didn't before?" "Not really. We were just existing, going through the motions. I don't think any of us knew how to do more than that." "And now?" Caleb looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, something that looked almost like hope. "Now it feels like we might figure it out," he said. Lian Yue didn't know what to say to that, so she went back to her mending. But her chest felt tight in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. The peace didn't last. It never did. Lian Yue was in the garden one afternoon, her hands deep in the soil, when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron, and squinted toward the road. The wagon was unfamiliar, newer than most that came through, with a driver dressed too well for ranch work. Behind him sat a man Lian Yue recognized immediately, even though she'd spent years trying to forget his face. Her father. Her stomach dropped. The wagon rolled to the stop in front of the house. Her father climbed down slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes scanning the property like he was appraising livestock. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes were the same, cold and calculating. Lian Yue walked toward him, her heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Is that any way to greet your father?" "You're not welcome here. This is not your property to decide who is welcome." He gestured to the house. "I came to see where my daughter ended up, to make sure she's being treated well." "I'm fine. Now leave." "Not until we talk." "We have nothing to talk about." His smile vanished. "You owe me money." There it was, Lian Yue's hands clenched into fists. "I don't owe you anything. I paid for your passage here, paid the agent. That money needs to be repaid. You sold me like cattle. You don't get to call that a debt." His eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone. You're still my daughter." Only when it's convenient for you. The door to the house opened and Caleb stepped out. He took in the scene with a glance, Lian Yue's rigid posture, the stranger's expensive clothes, the tension crackling in the air. "There a problem?" Caleb asked, his voice flat. Her father turned, sizing him up. "You must be the rancher. Caleb Hale, yes?" "That's right. I am Lian Yue's father. I've come to discuss her situation." "Her situation's fine. That's not for you to decide." Her father pulled a folded paper from his coat. "She owes me $300 for passage and fees. I expect payment." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's not a transaction." "She is until the debt is paid. That's not how this works." "It is exactly how this works." Her father's voice turned sharp. "The law is clear. A daughter's obligations to her family do not end simply because she marries." "We're not married," Caleb said. Lian Yue's father smiled. "Then she has no legal protection, which means she comes with me until the debt is settled." "Like hell she does." Her father's expression hardened. "I will go to the courts if I must, but one way or another, I will have what I'm owed." Caleb took a step forward. "You threatening me?" "I'm informing you of reality." The air was electric. Lian Yue could see Caleb's hands curl into fists, could see the anger rising in him like a wave. She stepped between them before it could break. "Stop," she said. "Both of you." She turned to her father. "I'll pay you." His eyebrows rose. "Will you?" "Yes, but it'll take time." "How much time?" "As much as it takes." He studied her, then shook his head. "Not good enough. I want half now. The rest in 3 months." "I don't have half." "Then we go to court." "Let him take it to court," Caleb said. "We'll fight it." "And lose," her father said calmly. "I have documents, proof of payment." "What do you have?" Lian Yue's mind raced. She didn't have money, didn't have proof of anything except that she'd been desperate enough to get on a wagon and trust a system that saw her as cargo. "1 month," she said. "I'll get you $100 in 1 month, the rest in 6 months." Her father considered this. 100 in 1 month, 200 in 6 months. If you miss a payment, you come with me. Agreed? Every part of her wanted to tell him to go to hell. But she knew he'd do it, knew he'd drag this to court and win, because the law wasn't built to protect women like her. "Agreed," she said. Her father smiled and tucked the paper back into his coat. "I'll return in 1 month. Have the money ready." He climbed back onto the wagon, and the driver snapped the reins. They rolled away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Lian Yue stood frozen, her nails digging into her palms. Caleb moved beside her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. We could have fought it. And lost. You heard him. He has documents. I have nothing." "You have me." She looked at him, surprised. His face was hard, his eyes fierce. "You have me. And the boys. And this place. That's not nothing." Lian Yue's throat tightened. "It's not enough to win in court." "Then we'll find another way." "There is no other way. I have to pay him." Caleb's jaw worked. "Where are you going to get $100 in a month?" Lian Yue looked at the house, the barn, the land stretching out in every direction. "I don't know," she said, "but I'll figure it out." That night, sleep didn't come. Lian Yue lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind turning over possibilities and discarding them just as fast. $100 might as well have been 1,000. She had no money, no savings, no way to earn that kind of sum in a month. Unless an idea formed. Fragile. Risky. But possible. The next morning, she cornered Caleb in the barn. "I need to go to town," she said. He looked up from the harness he was mending. "What for?" "I have an idea. For the money." His expression darkened. "Lian, just take me to town, please." He studied her face, then sighed. "When?" "Today." "Today? I don't have time to waste." He set down the harness. "Fine. Let me tell the boys." They rode into Ridgemont in the same wagon that had brought her here months ago. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Caleb kept glancing at her like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, he asked, "What are you planning?" "You'll see." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got right now." He didn't push. When they reached town, Lian Yue climbed down and headed straight for the general store. Caleb followed. Inside, the shopkeeper, a round man named Morris, looked up from his ledger. "Caleb, didn't expect to see you today." "I'm here with her, so," Caleb said, nodding at Lian Yue. Morris's eyes shifted to her, his expression guarded. "What can I do for you?" Lian Yue pulled a bundle from her bag, the mending she'd done over the past months, including a shirt she'd embroidered with careful, precise stitches. "I can sew," she said. "Better than most. I want to take commissions." Morris blinked. "Commissions?" "People bring me their mending, their alterations, things that need fixing. I do the work, you take a cut for connecting us." Morris picked up the shirt, examining the stitching. His eyebrows rose. "This is good work." "I know." He looked at Caleb. "She's serious?" "She is," Caleb said. Morris set the shirt down. "All right, I'll spread the word, but I take 20%. 15, Lian Yue countered. 18. Done. They shook hands. As they left the store, Caleb shook his head. "You're something else, you know that?" "I'm practical." "You're stubborn." "I thought we established that already." He almost smiled. Over the next 3 weeks, Lian Yue sewed until her fingers ached. She took every commission Morris sent her way, mending torn trousers, hemming dresses, embroidering initials on handkerchiefs. She worked late into the night, her needle flashing in the lamplight, her eyes burning from the strain. Sam helped where he could, threading needles and organizing fabric. Ethan brought her coffee without being asked. Caleb took over more of the cooking so she could focus. They didn't talk about it. They just did it. By the end of the month, Lian Yue had $87. It wasn't enough. She was sitting at the table, staring at the coins and bills spread out in front of her, when Caleb walked in. He looked at the money, then at her. "How much are you short?" $13. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out $13 and set it on the table. "Caleb, don't argue. I can't take your money. It's not a gift. It's an investment." "In what?" "In you staying." Lian Yue's eyes burned. "Why?" He sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Because this place is better with you in it. Because the boys need you. Because I—" He stopped, struggling with the words. "Because I don't want you to go." The words hung in the air between them. Lian Yue looked down at the money, her vision blurring. "Thank you," she whispered. When her father returned, Lian Yue was waiting. She handed him the $100 without a word. He counted it twice, then tucked it into his coat. 6 months, don't forget." "I won't." He left. And Lian Yue went back inside where Caleb and the boys were waiting. She was still here, still fighting, and she wasn't done yet. The months that followed her father's first visit settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, though Lian Yue knew better than to trust normal. She sewed every night until her fingers cramped, taking commissions from Morris and anyone else in town who needed work done. The money came in slowly, $1 here, $3 there, but it came. She kept it in a tin box under her bed, counting it every Sunday night with the kind of focus other people reserved for prayer. Sam still followed her around like a shadow, though he was stronger now, filling out in the shoulders and growing tall enough that his pants needed letting down every few months. He helped with the sewing sometimes, cutting fabric and sorting thread, his tongue poking out between his teeth when he concentrated. He talked more too, told her about the horses he wanted to train someday, the places he wanted to see, the life he imagined beyond the ranch. "You think I could go to San Francisco?" he asked one evening while she hemmed a pair of trousers. "Why San Francisco?" "Ethan says it's big, says they got buildings tall as mountains and ships from everywhere." His eyes went distant. "I'd like to see that." "Maybe you will." "You ever want to see places like that?" Lian Yu thought about the village she'd left behind, the cities she'd passed through on her way west, the endless sameness of desperation and survival. "I've seen enough places." "Don't you get bored here?" She looked at him. "Do I seem bored?" He grinned. "No, you seem busy." "Then there's your answer." Ethan was different. He didn't follow her around, didn't ask questions, but he orbited closer than he used to. He fixed things without announcing it. The loose board on the porch, the crack in the water trough, the gate that had been hanging crooked since before Lian Yue arrived. He started eating breakfast with them instead of taking his food outside, started staying at the table after dinner instead of disappearing the moment his plate was clean. One night he even laughed at something Sam said. It was a short laugh, more of a snort, but it counted. Caleb noticed. Lian Yu saw it in the way he watched his sons, the way his shoulders relaxed when they were all together, the way something that had been clenched tight in his chest seemed to loosen just slightly. He talked more now. Not a lot. Caleb would never be a man who filled silence with words, but enough that Lian Yue learned things about him. He'd built the ranch from nothing, bought the land cheap because nobody else wanted it, and spent 10 years breaking his back to make it work. His wife had come from back east, a city girl who'd married him on a dare and stayed because she'd fallen in love with the land as much as the man. She died 2 years ago come winter, and he still couldn't talk about it without his voice going flat. "I should have gotten to the doctor sooner," he said one night. They were sitting on the porch, the boys already asleep, the sky black and thick with stars. "I kept thinking she'd get better on her own, that it was just a fever, nothing serious." "You couldn't have known," Lian Yue said. "I should have known. I was her husband." "Being someone's husband doesn't make you a doctor." He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. "You saved Sam." "I couldn't save her. Sam was lucky, and I was stubborn. That's all it was." "That's not all it was." Lian Yue didn't argue. She'd learned that Caleb needed to believe she'd done something extraordinary because the alternative, that his wife had died from nothing more than bad luck and timing, was too cruel to accept. They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, and another answered. The wind moved through the grass like water. "You ever think about leaving?" Caleb asked. The question surprised her. "Why would I?" "Because it's hard here. Because you could do better somewhere else." "Better how?" He gestured vaguely. "Easier life. City work. You're smart enough for it." Lian Yue looked out at the dark shape of the land rolling away from them. "I didn't come here for easy." "What did you come here for?" She thought about it. "A place to stand." He was quiet for a long moment, then, "You've got that." "I know." Something passed between them in the dark. Not spoken. Not defined. Just there. The second payment came due faster than Lian Yue expected. She'd been counting down the days like a prisoner marking time, watching the money in her tin box grow with agonizing slowness. By the time her father's wagon rolled up the road again, she had $193. $7 short. She was standing outside when he arrived, her arms crossed, her face expressionless. He climbed down from the wagon with the same calculated slowness, like he had all the time in the world and wanted her to know it. "Daughter, I have your money." "All of it?" She hesitated, just a second, but he caught it. His smile was thin and sharp. "You're short." $7. I'll have it next week." "That wasn't the agreement." "I know what the agreement was. I'm asking for 1 week." He shook his head slowly, like a teacher disappointed in a student. "The agreement was $200 today." "You don't have it." "That means you come with me." "Like hell she does," Caleb said. He'd come out of the barn without Lian Yue noticing, and now he stood between her and her father like a wall. Her father's expression didn't change. "This is not your concern, Mr. Hale." "She lives under my roof. That makes it my concern." "She lives under your roof because I allowed it. That allowance ends today." Caleb took a step forward. "You're not taking her anywhere." "Then you'll pay the $7 she owes." "I'll pay whatever I damn well please." Her father's eyes gleamed. "Good. Then pay the full amount, $200, plus interest for the delay." "Interest?" "Of course. Did you think borrowing money was free?" He pulled out his papers again, unfolding them with deliberate care. According to the contract she signed, any late payment accrues interest at 10% per month. Lian Yue's stomach dropped. "I didn't sign anything." "Your mark is here." He pointed to a spot on the paper where a shaky X sat next to her name. "Witnessed and notarized." "That's not my mark." "Can you prove it?" She couldn't. She'd been so desperate to leave, so willing to believe anything that got her out, that she hadn't read the papers, hadn't asked questions, hadn't protected herself. "This is fraud," Caleb said. "This is business. If you believe it's fraud, Take me to court. Her father folded the papers and tucked them away. But until then, she comes with me or you pay $220. Your choice. Caleb's hands curled into fists. For a moment, Lian Yue thought he might hit her father, and part of her wanted him to. But then his jaw tightened and he turned away. How long do I have? He asked. 1 hour. That's not enough time. 1 hour, or she leaves with me now. Caleb looked at Lian Yue. She saw the frustration in his eyes, the helplessness, and she hated it. Hated that her father could do this. Hated that the law would let him. Hated that she'd been stupid enough to trust anything he'd said. Don't pay him, she said quietly. Lian, he'll just keep coming back, keep adding more. It'll never end. I'm not letting him take you. You don't have a choice. The hell I don't. Her father cleared his throat. 59 minutes. Caleb turned and strode toward the barn. Lian Yue started to follow, but Ethan appeared in the doorway of the house. Don't go with him, he said. She looked at him. His face was pale, his fists clenched at his sides. I have to, she said. No, you don't. Paul, figure something out. There's nothing to figure out. There's always something. His voice cracked. You can't just leave. Sam appeared behind him, his eyes wide. What's happening? Nothing, Lian Yue said. Go inside. Is he taking you away? Sam's voice was small, frightened. I said go inside. Sam didn't move. Ethan put a hand on his shoulder, but his eyes stayed on Lian Yue. You saved my brother, Ethan said. You fixed this place. He stopped, struggling. We need you. The words hit harder than Lian Yue expected. She looked at these two boys who'd hated her when she arrived, who'd made it clear she wasn't wanted, who'd shut her out and pushed her away. And now they were looking at her like she was the only thing standing between them and the dark. I'll be back, she said, though she didn't know if it was true. When? Sam asked. I don't know. Caleb came out of the barn carrying a metal box. He walked past her father without looking at him, went into the house, and came back out a few minutes later. 220, he said, holding out a stack of bills. Her father counted them slowly, making sure everyone watched. When he was satisfied, he tucked the money into his coat and smiled. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Hale. Get off my land. Her father climbed back onto the wagon. Before he snapped the reins, he looked at Lian Yue. 6 months, same terms. Don't be late. The wagon rolled away. Caleb stood perfectly still, his hands empty, his face carved from stone. You shouldn't have done that, Lian Yue said. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not when it comes to you. The words hung in the air between them, too big to acknowledge, too important to ignore. Ethan broke the silence. Where'd you get the money? Caleb didn't answer. Pa, where'd it come from? The cattle fund, Caleb said finally. Lian Yue's heart sank. The spring cattle fund. Yeah. That was for buying new stock, for expanding the herd. I know what it was for. Then why? Because you're more important than cattle. His voice cracked like a whip, loud enough that Sam flinched. Caleb took a breath, forced himself to calm down. We'll manage. We always do. But Lian Yue could see the truth in his face. They wouldn't just manage. They'd struggle. That money was supposed to carry them through the winter and set them up for next year. Without it, they'd be working twice as hard for half the gain, because of her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her, feeling the weight of what Caleb had done pressing down on her chest like a stone. He'd given up his future for her. The boys needed her, he'd said. We need you. But what happened when her father came back? What happened when the next payment came due and they had even less to work with? What happened when the weight of her debt dragged them all down? She couldn't let that happen. The next morning, Lian Yue rode into town alone. She told Caleb she needed supplies, told Sam she'd be back by supper, told Ethan nothing because he was watching her with eyes that saw too much. She went straight to the courthouse. The building was small and sun-worn, the kind of place that looked like it had been built as an afterthought and maintained the same way. Inside, it smelled like dust and old paper and disappointment. A clerk sat behind a desk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the expression of someone who'd stopped caring about his job years ago. Help you? he asked without looking up. I need information about debt contracts. That got his attention. He looked at her over the rim of his spectacles. What kind of debt? Personal? Family? He set down his pen. You in trouble? Maybe. He gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me what's going on. Lian Yue sat and told him everything. The arrangement that brought her west, her father's claims, the contract she'd supposedly signed, the payments, the interest. The clerk listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You got a copy of this contract? He asked. No. You see what you supposedly signed? He showed me papers, but I don't know if they're real. The clerk rubbed his face with both hands. All right, here's the truth. If he's got documents that look legitimate, and if he can show you agreed to the terms, then legally he's got a case. Even if the terms are predatory, even if they're wrong. So I'm trapped. Not necessarily, but fighting it'll cost money you don't have and time you probably don't have either. He leaned back in his chair. You got anyone who can vouch for you? Anyone who was there when this arrangement was made? Just the agent who handled it. Hutchins. Hutchins? The clerk's mouth twisted. That snake wouldn't tell the truth if his life depended on it. He's probably in on it. Lian Yue had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. There has to be something I can do, she said. The clerk thought about it. You could challenge the contract in court, argue that it was signed under duress, that you didn't understand what you were agreeing to, that the terms are unconscionable. Would that work? Maybe. If you had a good lawyer, if the judge was sympathetic, if your father didn't have better documents than you do. He shook his head. It's a gamble. What happens if I lose? You pay the full amount plus court costs, or you go with him. Lian Yue stood. Thank you for your time. Wait. The clerk pulled out a piece of paper and wrote something down. This is a lawyer in Reading, name's Margaret Chen. She handles cases like this sometimes. Might take you on if you can convince her. I can't afford a lawyer. She works on contingency sometimes, meaning she gets paid if you win. He handed her the paper. Worth a try. Lian Yu folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Thank you. She left before he could see the fear in her eyes. The ride back to the ranch felt twice as long as the ride into town. Lian Yue's mind turned over possibilities and discarded them just as fast. A lawyer was a risk. Going to court was a bigger risk. But doing nothing meant watching her father bleed Caleb dry payment by payment until there was nothing left. She couldn't do that. When she got home, Sam was in the garden pulling weeds. He looked up when he heard the wagon and waved. You get the supplies? He called. Most of them, she lied. He went back to his weeds. Lian Yue unhitched the horses and led them to the barn, her movements automatic, her thoughts elsewhere. Caleb was inside, mending tack. He glanced up when she entered. Took you a while, he said. Lines were long. He nodded and went back to his work. But his hands had stilled and she could feel him watching her. You all right? He asked. Fine. You're a terrible liar. She almost smiled. I know. He set down the tack and stood. What happened in town? Nothing. Lian. She met his eyes. I went to the courthouse, asked about the contract. His jaw tightened. And? And I might have a way to fight it, but it's risky. How risky? If we lose, it gets worse. Caleb crossed the space between them in 2 strides. Then we don't lose. It's not that simple. It never is. He put his hands on her shoulders, his grip firm, grounding. But we're not backing down. Not from him. Not from anyone. Lian Yue looked up at him. His face was set, determined, the way it got when he was working on something that should have been impossible, but he was going to do it anyway. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because you're family now. The words were simple, plain, but they hit her like a wave. Family. She'd never had that. Not really. Her father had treated her like property. Her mother had died when she was too young to remember. She'd spent her whole life being a burden, a transaction, something to be moved around and used up. But here, in this broken-down ranch, with this stubborn man and his grieving sons, she'd found something different. She'd found people who fought for her. I don't know if I can win, she said. Then we'll lose together. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it wasn't his fight, that he'd already given too much, that she wasn't worth the cost. But the look in his eyes stopped her. All right, she said. We fight. The next morning, Lian Yue wrote a letter to Margaret Chen. She kept it simple, explained the situation, included the details the clerk had told her to mention, and asked for help. She didn't beg, didn't make promises she couldn't keep, just laid out the facts and hoped it would be enough. Caleb took the letter to town and mailed it. When he came back, he brought news. Talk to Morris, he said. He's spreading the word about your sewing. Says you've got more commissions coming in than he can handle. That's good. Yeah, except some of them are from folks 2 towns over. They want custom work, fancy stuff. Lian Yue raised an eyebrow. How fancy? Wedding dresses, christening gowns. The kind of thing that takes weeks and costs real money. Her mind started calculating. How much money? Enough to make a dent in what you owe. It was a lifeline, a chance. Lian Yue grabbed it with both hands. Over the next 3 months, she sewed like her life depended on it. Because it did. She took every commission that came her way, no matter how complicated or time-consuming. She made dresses that required 50 yards of fabric and 100 hours of work. She embroidered pillowcases with initials so elaborate they looked like art. She fixed hems and tears and mistakes other seamstresses had made and charged triple for the trouble. The money came in, slowly, painfully. But it came. Sam helped when he could, though his hands were too big now for the delicate work. Ethan took over more of the chores so she could focus. Caleb brought her coffee at midnight when she was still working, sat with her in silence while she stitched, and never once complained about the lamp burning through oil. And then, 2 weeks before her father's next visit, a letter arrived. It was from Margaret Chen. Lian Yue's hands shook as she opened it. The letter was short, professional, to the point. Margaret Chen would take the case. She believed the contract was fraudulent and the terms unconscionable. She would represent Lian Yue in court. But she needed Lian Yue to come to Reading for a meeting. They had 2 weeks to prepare. Lian Yue read the letter 3 times to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. Then she started to cry. Not from relief. Not from fear. From something bigger than both. Something that felt like hope and terror mixed together so tightly she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Caleb found her like that, sitting at the table with the letter clutched in her hands and tears streaming down her face. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just pulled up a chair and sat with her until she could breathe again. We're going to court, she said finally. All right. I might lose. You might win. She looked at him. What if I don't? Then we'll figure something else out. But right now, we fight. Lian Yue wiped her eyes and nodded. She'd come to this place with nothing. Been chosen by a man who'd been desperate enough to take what no one else wanted. She'd fought illness and grief and silence and a father who saw her as currency. And she'd survived. Now it was time to do more than survive. It was time to win. The trip to Reading took 2 days by wagon, and Caleb insisted on coming with her. You don't have to, Lian Yue said while packing a small bag the night before they were supposed to leave. I know I don't have to. He was checking the wagon wheels in the barn, his movements efficient and practiced. I'm coming anyway. The boys can handle themselves for a few days. Ethan's 15 now. He knows what needs doing. Lian Yue wanted to argue, but the truth was she didn't want to make the trip alone. The thought of facing a lawyer, of putting words to everything that had happened, of standing up in a room full of strangers and claiming she deserved better, it terrified her in a way that physical work never had. So she nodded and finished packing. They left before dawn. Sam and Ethan stood on the porch watching them go, Sam still rubbing sleep from his eyes, Ethan with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Don't let the chickens out until after you feed them, Lian Yue called, and there's stew in the pot for tonight. Just heat it up. We know, Ethan said, and check the fence on the east side. One of the posts was looking loose. We'll be fine, Ethan interrupted, but his voice wasn't sharp, just certain. You go do what you gotta do. Sam raised a hand in a wave. Bring us back something good. Lian Yue smiled despite the knot in her stomach. I'll try. The wagon rolled forward, and the boys disappeared behind them into the pre-dawn darkness. The road to Reading was long and dusty, cutting through open country that looked the same for miles, dry grass, scattered trees, the occasional farmhouse sitting alone against the horizon like a forgotten thought. They stopped twice to rest the horses and eat the bread and cheese Lian Yue had packed. Neither of them talked much. Caleb wasn't the talking type, and Lian Yue's mind was too full of what-ifs to make conversation. By the time they reached Reading late the next day, Lian Yue's body ached from the wagon seat, and her nerves were strung tight as wire. Reading was bigger than Ridgemont, not by much, but enough that it felt like a different world. The streets were wider, the buildings taller, and there were more people moving through the town with the kind of purpose that came from having places to be and things to do. Lian Yue felt small looking at it all, like she'd stepped into something too big for her to navigate. Caleb found a boarding house that would take them for 2 nights. The woman who ran it, a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Kowalski, looked them over with sharp eyes before quoting a price that made Caleb wince but pay anyway. "Breakfast is at 7, Mrs. Kowalski said, handing Caleb a key. "No drinking, no fighting, no visitors after 9. You break something, you buy it." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said. She pointed down a narrow hallway. "3rd door on the left for you, 4th door for her." They took their bags to their separate rooms. Lian Yue's was small and plain. A bed, a washstand, a single window that looked out onto the street below. She set her bag on the bed and sat down, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the journey. A knock on the door frame made her look up. Caleb stood there, hat in hand. "You all right?" he asked. "Tired." "Yeah." He shifted his weight. "Meeting's tomorrow at 10. You want to go over anything tonight?" "Like what?" "What you're going to say. How you're going to explain everything." Lian Yue rubbed her face with both hands. "I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't even know if it matters. He has papers. I have nothing. You have the truth. That doesn't always win." Caleb stepped into the room and sat down in the chair by the window. "No, but it's all we've got, so we're going with it." She looked at him, this man who'd chosen her when no one else would, who'd paid money he didn't have to keep her safe, who'd left his sons and his ranch to sit in a boarding house and tell her the truth was enough. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really?" He was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat over in his hands. "You remember when Sam got sick?" "Of course." I froze. Completely froze. I looked at him burning up with that fever, and all I could think was, not again. Not another one. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. I was useless. "You were scared." "I was a coward. And you—" He looked up at her. "You didn't freeze. You didn't fall apart. You just fought. You fought for him like he was yours, and you didn't ask for anything in return. You didn't even expect us to be grateful." "I didn't do it for gratitude." "I know. That's my point." He set his hat on his knee. "You saved my son's life. Before that, you'd already saved this house just by being in it. You gave us something to care about again, something other than just getting through the day." Lian Yu's throat tightened. "Caleb, I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I need you to understand something." He met her eyes. "You're not fighting this alone. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever that lawyer says, whatever the court decides, we're in this together. You and me and the boys. That's family, and family doesn't leave." The words broke something open inside her. Not in a painful way, in a way that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be long." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Lian Yue sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the town below. Voices, footsteps, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. For the first time since her father had shown up with his papers and his demands, she felt something other than fear. She felt ready. Margaret Chen's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building near the courthouse. The stairs were narrow and creaked with every step, and the hallway smelled like old paper and tobacco. A small sign on the door read, "M. Chen, Attorney at Law," in plain black letters. Caleb knocked. "Come in," a voice called. They entered to find a woman sitting behind a desk that was buried under stacks of papers, books, and what looked like 3 different cases worth of documents. She was younger than Lian Yue had expected, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that assessed them both in the space of a heartbeat. You must be Lian Yue, she said, standing and extending a hand. Margaret Chen. Lian Yue shook it. Margaret's grip was firm, no nonsense. And you are? Margaret turned to Caleb. Caleb Hale. He hesitated. He's with me, Lian Yue said. Margaret's eyebrow rose slightly, but she nodded. Fair enough. Sit. They sat. Margaret shuffled through papers until she found the ones she wanted, then spread them out on the desk. All right, let's get to it. You sent me the basics in your letter, but I need details. Start from the beginning. How did this arrangement with your father happen? Lian Yu took a breath and told the story. How she'd been working in a laundry in San Francisco, barely making enough to eat. How her father had found her and told her about the opportunity out west. A new life, a fresh start, a chance to marry and settle down. How he'd said he'd arranged everything, paid the fees, handled the paperwork. How desperate she'd been to believe him. Margaret listened without interrupting, her pen moving across paper as she took notes. Did you sign anything? She asked when Lian Yue finished. Not that I remember. He showed me papers when I got to Ridgemont, but I never signed them. He claims you did. Claims he has your mark. It's not mine. Margaret tapped her pen against her lips. Can you prove that? No. Can anyone vouch for what happened when you arrived? Lian Yue thought. The agent, Hutchins. He was there. Would he testify on your behalf? No, he's probably in on it. Margaret nodded like she'd expected that answer. All right. What about witnesses to your father's behavior? Anyone who can testify that he coerced you, threatened you, demanded money under false pretenses? Caleb spoke up. I was there the second time he came. Heard him threaten to take her if she didn't pay. That helps. Anyone else? My son saw part of it. Margaret wrote that down. How old are they? 15 and 9. The 15-year-old can testify. The 9-year-old's too young. Court won't take him seriously. She looked back at Lian Yue. What about the payments? Do you have records of what you paid? I kept the receipts. Lian Yue pulled a folded envelope from her bag and handed it over. Margaret opened it and examined the papers inside. Her expression darkened. He charged you interest. 10% per month. He says it was in the contract. 10% per month is usury. It's illegal in this state. Margaret set the papers down and leaned back in her chair. All right. Here's what we're looking at. Your father claims you owe him money based on a contract you supposedly signed. He has documents that may or may not be legitimate. You have no copy of the contract, no witnesses to the signing, and no clear proof that the signature isn't yours. So I lose. Not necessarily. We can argue several things. First, that the contract is fraudulent, that you never signed it, and the mark isn't yours. Second, that even if you did sign something, you did so under duress and without understanding the terms. Third, that the terms themselves are unconscionable, that no reasonable person would agree to 10% monthly interest, and that enforcing such terms would be unjust. Will that work? Caleb asked. Depends on the judge. Depends on how good your father's lawyer is. Depends on whether we can make the court see you as a person instead of a debt. Margaret looked at Lian Yue. I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be hard. Your father has the advantage of documentation, and the law tends to favor written contracts over verbal testimony. But we have a shot, especially with the usury angle. What do you need from me? Lian Yue asked. The truth. All of it. No matter how bad it makes you look, no matter how uncomfortable it is. If you hold back, if you lie, if you try to make yourself sound better than you are, we lose. Understood? Lian Yue nodded. Good. Margaret pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Let's go through everything again, every detail, every conversation, every moment you can remember. We've got 3 days to build a case that can stand up in court. They worked until the sun set and the office grew too dark to see properly. Margaret asked questions Lian Yue didn't want to answer, pushed on details she'd tried to forget, made her relive moments she'd buried deep. By the time they finished, Lian Yue felt wrung out like a rag. That's enough for today, Margaret said, setting down her pen. Go get some rest. We'll meet again tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. Lian Yue and Caleb stood to leave. At the door, Margaret called out, Lian? She turned. You did the right thing, coming here, fighting back. Margaret's expression softened just slightly. A lot of women in your position wouldn't have. They'd have just accepted it and disappeared. The fact that you're here tells me you're stronger than you think. Lian Yue didn't feel strong. She felt terrified, but she nodded and left before her voice could betray her. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Margaret drilled her on testimony, taught her how to answer questions without volunteering information, warned her about tricks opposing counsel might use to trip her up. She brought in Caleb and Ethan, who'd arrived the second day with Sam in tow, both boys refusing to be left behind, and coached them on their statements. "Keep it simple," she told Ethan. "Just say what you saw. Don't embellish, don't guess. If you don't know something, say you don't know." Ethan nodded, his jaw set in the same stubborn line as his father's. Sam wanted to testify too, but Margaret shook her head. "You're too young. The court won't allow it." "That's not fair," Sam said. "No, it's not. But it's the law." On the third day, they went to court. The courthouse was bigger than the one in Ridgemont, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling that made everything feel heavy and official. People moved through the halls with briefcases and stern expressions, their shoes clicking on the tile floors. Lian Yue's father was already there when they arrived. He sat on a bench outside the courtroom, his lawyer beside him, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked at Lian Yue like she was something he'd found on his shoe. Her father smiled when he saw her. "Daughter, I didn't expect you to make this so complicated." "I'm not your daughter," she said. "The law says otherwise." Margaret stepped between them. "Save it for the courtroom." The lawyer stood. "Margaret Chen, I should have known. You always did have a soft spot for lost causes. And you always did have a talent for defending crooks, Martin." Martin's smile didn't waver. "See you inside." They filed into the courtroom. It was smaller than Lian Yue expected, with rows of benches on either side and a judge's bench at the front. A clerk sat at a desk to one side, shuffling papers. A few spectators sat in the back, people with nothing better to do than watch other people's lives fall apart. The judge entered, and everyone stood. He was an older man with white hair and a face that looked like it had seen everything twice and wasn't impressed either time. "Be seated," he said. "Let's get this over with. Case number 471, Chen versus..." He squinted at his papers. "How do you even pronounce this?" "It's a contract dispute, Your Honor," Margaret said. "My client, Lian Yue, is contesting the validity of a debt contract her father claims she signed." "Fine. Mr. Bradley, you're representing the plaintiff?" Martin stood. "Yes, Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. My client provided financial support for his daughter's passage west and subsequent settlement. She signed a contract agreeing to repay those funds with reasonable interest. She has failed to meet her obligations, and we are seeking enforcement of the contract terms." "Ms. Chen?" Margaret rose. "Your Honor, this is not a contract dispute. This is extortion. My client never signed the document in question. The terms are unconscionable and violate state usury laws. And the so-called debt is a fabrication designed to control and exploit a woman who had no legal recourse." The judge looked between them. "All right, let's hear it. Mr. Bradley, call your first witness." Martin called Lian Yue's father to the stand. He looked calm, almost serene, as he swore to tell the truth. Martin led him through a series of questions designed to paint him as a concerned father who'd only wanted to help his daughter. "I paid for her passage," her father said, "paid the agent fees, made sure she had a safe place to go. All I asked was that she repay the money when she was able." "And did she agree to these terms?" Martin asked. "Yes. She signed the contract willingly." "Did you force her to sign?" "Of course not. She was grateful for the opportunity." It was a performance, a lie delivered so smoothly it almost sounded true. When it was Margaret's turn to cross-examine, she didn't waste time. "Mr. Wu, you claim your daughter signed this contract willingly. Do you have witnesses to the signing?" "The agent witnessed it." "Is the agent here today?" "No." "Why not?" Her father hesitated. "I don't know where he is." "Convenient. So we only have your word that this signing occurred. And the document itself." Margaret held up the contract. "This document shows an X next to your daughter's name. Can you prove this mark is hers? It's her mark." "How do you know?" "Because I watched her make it." "But you just said the agent witnessed it. Were you there or weren't you?" Her father's expression flickered, just for a second. "I was present during the discussion. The agent handled the paperwork." So you didn't actually watch her sign? I. The agent confirmed it. The agent who isn't here. The agent you can't locate. Margaret set the document down. Let's talk about the interest. 10% per month. That's 120% annually. Are you aware that's illegal in this state? I'm not familiar with. It's usury, Mr. Wu. It's exploitation, and it's against the law. Martin stood. Objection. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, the judge said. Miss Chen, ask questions. Margaret nodded. Mr. Wu, did you inform your daughter that the interest rate violated state law? I assume she understood the terms. Did you explain them to her? She's a grown woman. She can read. Can she? Can she read English legal documents? Her father's jaw tightened. That's not my responsibility. But taking her money is. No further questions. The rest of the day was a battle. Martin called witnesses, people who'd supposedly seen Lian Yue with her father, who claimed she'd seemed willing, who said she'd never complained. Margaret tore them apart one by one, exposing inconsistencies and vague memories. When court adjourned for the day, Lian Yue felt like she'd been beaten. We're holding our own, Margaret said as they left the courthouse. Tomorrow we put you on the stand. That's when we win or lose. That night, Lian Yu couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She sat in her room at the boarding house, staring at the wall, trying to prepare herself for what was coming. A knock on the door. Caleb. Can I come in? He asked. She nodded. He sat on the chair by the window, the same spot he'd taken that first night. You ready? No. Yeah, me neither, and I'm not even the one testifying. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're going to do fine. You don't know that. I know you. You don't break. You bend, maybe. But you don't break. Lian Yue looked at him. What if I do this time? Then I'll be there to catch you. The next morning, Margaret called Lian Yue to the stand. The walk from the bench to the witness chair felt like a mile. Every eye in the room was on her. Her father sat with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The judge watched with the detached interest of someone who'd heard 1,000 stories just like this. Lian Yue swore to tell the truth and sat down. Margaret started gentle, asked about her life before coming west, about her work, her circumstances, her desperation. Lian Yue answered honestly, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. Then Margaret asked about the contract. Did you sign this document? She held it up. No. Did you agree to the terms outlined in it? No, I didn't even know there were terms. He just said he'd help me get west. Did he explain that you'd owe him money? Not until I was already here, not until it was too late to go back. What did you think when he demanded payment? Lian Yue met her father's eyes across the courtroom. I thought he was doing what he always did, using me. Margaret nodded. No further questions. Martin stood for cross-examination. He circled her like a predator. Ms. Lian, you claim you didn't sign this contract, but you also admit you were desperate. Isn't it possible you signed something without reading it carefully? I didn't sign anything. You were in a difficult situation. Maybe you've forgotten. I haven't forgotten. Or maybe you're lying because you don't want to pay what you owe. Objection, Margaret said. Badgering. Sustained. Martin switched tactics. You've been living with Mr. Hale for over a year now. Is that correct? Yes. And he's paid money on your behalf. Yes? So you have someone to rely on, someone with resources. Why should the court believe you can't pay your debts when you have a man supporting you? Lian Yue's hands clenched in her lap. He's not supporting me. He's helping me because we're family. Family. Martin's smile was thin. But you're not married. No. So he's just a man you live with, a man who pays your debts. That's an interesting arrangement. The implication was clear, ugly. Lian Yue felt rage rise in her chest, hot and bright. That arrangement, she said slowly, is called people caring about each other. Maybe you don't understand that, but it's real. Martin's smile faltered. Mr. Hale gave me a place when no one else would. His sons accepted me when they had every reason not to. I work for what I have. I earn my place. And I don't owe my father a single thing except the truth, which is this. He sold me. He took money for putting me on a wagon and sending me west like I was cargo. And now he wants more. Not because I owe it, Because he thinks he can take it. The courtroom was silent. Martin recovered quickly. A touching speech, but it doesn't change the contract. There is no contract, Lian Yu said. There's just a piece of paper with a lie on it. She didn't break, didn't waver. When she stepped down from the stand, Caleb met her eyes and nodded. The judge called for closing arguments. Margaret stood and delivered a summary that was part legal argument, part moral plea. Martin countered with cold logic and documentation. Then the judge retired to his chambers. They waited for 2 hours. When the judge returned, his face was unreadable. I've reviewed the evidence, he said, and I've considered the arguments from both sides. This is not an easy case. On one hand, there is a signed contract. On the other, there are serious questions about the legitimacy of that signature and the legality of the terms. Lian Yue's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. However, the judge continued, the interest rate outlined in this contract clearly violates state usury laws. That alone makes the contract unenforceable. Furthermore, the plaintiff has failed to provide adequate proof that the defendant knowingly and willingly entered into this agreement. The testimony suggests coercion and exploitation, not mutual consent. Her father's face went red. Therefore, I find in favor of the defendant. The contract is void. Miss Lian owes nothing. Case dismissed. The gavel came down. For a moment, Lian Yu couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then Caleb's hand was on her shoulder, and Sam was hugging her from the side, and Ethan was grinning like he'd just won something himself. Margaret leaned over. You're free. Lian Yue turned to look at her father. He was standing now, his lawyer trying to calm him down, his face twisted with fury. She met his eyes one last time, and then she turned her back on him and walked away. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. Lian Yue stood on the steps, breathing in air that tasted like freedom, and for the first time in her entire life, she belonged to no one but herself. They didn't leave Reading right away. Sam wanted to celebrate, wanted to find a restaurant and eat something that wasn't beans or bread or whatever Lian Yue could coax out of the garden. Ethan was quieter about it, but Lian Yue could see the relief in the way his shoulders had dropped, the way he wasn't clenching his jaw every 5 seconds. Caleb just looked at her like he was making sure she was real. They ended up at a small place near the edge of town, the kind of restaurant that served simple food to working people who didn't have time for fancy. The 4 of them crowded into a corner table, and Sam ordered enough food for 6 people because he was 15 and apparently had a hollow leg. You're going to bankrupt us before we even get home, Ethan muttered, but he was grinning when he said it. We're celebrating, Sam said through a mouthful of bread. You can't celebrate on an empty stomach. You've never had an empty stomach in your life. Have 2. Have not. Caleb cleared his throat. You 2 want to argue or eat? Because the food's getting cold. They ate. Lin Yu picked at her plate, her appetite still somewhere back in that courtroom. She kept replaying the moment the judge had said the words, case dismissed, you're free. Kept waiting for someone to tell her it was a mistake, that her father had found some loophole, that she'd have to go back and fight again. But no one came. No one stopped her. She was free. The thought was so big she didn't know what to do with it. Caleb reached across the table and touched her hand. Just briefly. Just enough to pull her back to the present. You all right? He asked quietly. She nodded. Just trying to believe it's real. It's real. I know, She stopped, struggling for words. I've spent so long being something that belonged to someone else. My father. The people I worked for. Even coming here, I thought I was just trading one kind of ownership for another. You were never owned here, Caleb said. I know that now, but it took me a while to understand it. Sam leaned forward. So what happens now? What do you mean? Lian Yue asked. I mean, you won. You don't owe him anything, so what are you going to do? It was a fair question, a good question, and Lian Yue realized she didn't have an answer. For months, her entire life had been built around the next payment, the next deadline, the next fight. She'd been moving towards something, toward freedom, toward safety, toward proving she was more than what her father said she was. But now that she'd arrived, now that the fight was over, she didn't know what came next. I guess I go home, she said finally. Sam frowned. You guess? I mean, I do. I go home. To the ranch, Sam clarified, like he needed to make sure. Yes, to the ranch. The relief on his face was so obvious it made her chest ache. Ethan was watching her too, his expression guarded but hopeful. You're staying then? For real? For real, Lian Yue said. Good. Ethan grabbed another piece of bread and tore into it like the conversation was over. But Caleb was still looking at her, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read, something that looked like a question he didn't know how to ask. Later, after the boys had gone to bed at the boarding house and the town had settled into the quiet hum of evening, Lian Yu found herself sitting on the porch of Mrs. Kowalski's place, staring out at the street, footsteps behind her. Caleb, of course. Mind if I sit? He asked. It's your porch, too. He sat down on the step beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. For a while, neither of them said anything, just sat there listening to the distant sounds of the town, a piano playing somewhere, voices raised in laughter, a dog barking at nothing. You meant what you said in there? Caleb asked. About staying. Yes. Because you want to, or because you think you have to? Lian Yue turned to look at him. What kind of question is that? An honest one. He rubbed the back of his neck, the way he did when he was uncomfortable. I don't want you staying out of obligation. Don't want you thinking you owe me something because of the money or the court or any of it. I don't think that. Then why stay? You're free now. You could go anywhere, do anything. You don't have to tie yourself to a broken-down ranch. And a man who barely knows how to talk to people. Lian Yu studied his face. He wasn't looking at her, was staring straight ahead like he was afraid of what he'd see if he met her eyes. You think I'm staying out of pity? She asked. I think you're a good person. And good people do things for the wrong reasons sometimes. You're right. I am a good person, but I'm also selfish. She waited until he looked at her. I'm staying because I want to. Because that ranch is the first place I've ever lived that felt like it could be mine. Because those boys have become family in a way I never expected. Because you... She stopped. The words were there, right on the edge of her tongue, but saying them out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. Because I what? Caleb asked quietly. Because you make me feel like I matter. Not for what I can do, or what I'm worth, or what I owe, just for being me. The silence that followed was heavy. Not uncomfortable, just full. Caleb turned to face her fully. You do matter, more than you know. I'm starting to figure that out. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused from years of work, but his touch was gentle. I'm not good at this, he said, at saying what I mean. But I need you to know, these past months, having you here, watching you fight for yourself and for us, it changed things. Changed me. How? Made me remember what it's like to care about something other than just surviving. Made me think maybe there's more to life than just getting through the day. He squeezed her hand. I don't know what that means for us. Don't know if you even want there to be an us. But I needed to say it. Lian Yu felt tears prick her eyes. Not sad tears. The other kind. The kind that came from something breaking open inside you in a good way. There's an us, she said. There's been an us for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. Scared of what? Of wanting something and having it taken away. Caleb lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, steady and strong. I'm not going anywhere, he said, and neither are you. Not unless you want to. I don't want to. Then we're settled. She smiled through the tears. Guess we are. He leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or sweep you off your feet romantic. It was quiet and simple and real, and it felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, Caleb was smiling. Actually smiling. Lian Yue couldn't remember the last time she'd seen that. We should probably get some sleep, he said. Long ride home tomorrow. Probably. Neither of them moved. They sat there on that porch until the stars came out, hands linked, shoulders touching, and for the first time in longer than Lian Yue could remember, the future felt like something to look forward to instead of something to survive. The ride back to the ranch took 2 days, same as the trip out. But it felt different this time. Lighter. Sam talked non-stop about everything he wanted to do when they got home. Fix the fence, train the new calf, expand the garden. Ethan was quieter, but he sat up straighter, looked around more. seemed less like he was bracing for impact. Caleb drove the wagon with one hand, the other resting on the seat between him and Lian Yue. Every now and then their fingers would brush, and he'd glance at her with that small smile that was becoming less rare. When the ranch finally came into view, Lian Yue felt something loosen in her chest. The house was still weathered, the barn still leaned slightly, the fences still needed work. But it was home. Hers. In a way nothing else had ever been. They climbed down from the wagon, and Sam immediately ran off to check on the animals. Ethan started unloading their bags, waving off Caleb's attempt to help. "I got it," he said. "You two did enough." Caleb raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Lian Yue walked up to the house and stood on the porch, looking out at the land. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange, and the wind carried the smell of grass and dust and earth. Caleb came up beside her. "Good to be back?" "Yeah, it is. Place is still a mess." "It's our mess," he smiled. "That it is." Life settled back into its rhythm after that, but it was a different rhythm than before. Easier. More certain. Lian Yue kept sewing, kept taking commissions, but she wasn't doing it out of desperation anymore. She was doing it because she was good at it and because people wanted what she made. The money went into savings now, not into a tin box hidden under her bed for a payment that would never come. The garden flourished. Sam spent hours out there with her, learning which plants needed more water, which ones grew better in shade, how to coax life out of stubborn soil. He started talking about maybe having his own farm someday, someplace where he could grow things and raise animals and build something from nothing. "Like Pa did," he said one afternoon while they were pulling weeds. "Like your pa did," Lian Yue agreed. "You think I could do it?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to." He grinned. "You have to say that. You're basically my ma now." The word stopped her. Ma. Not Lian. Not her name. Ma. "Sam, I know you're not really. I know that." He kept pulling weeds, not looking at her. "But you feel like one, if that's okay." Lian Yue's throat was tight. "That's more than okay." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to work. Ethan was different too. He smiled more, talked more, started treating Lian Yue less like an intruder and more like someone who belonged. One evening, he came into the kitchen while she was making bread and just stood there watching. "You need something?" she asked. "No, just—" He shifted his weight. "I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up. On us. On this place. On yourself." He looked down at his hands. "After Ma died, I thought that was it. Thought we were just going to keep falling apart until there was nothing left. But then you showed up and you didn't let that happen." "You boys did the work," Lian Yue said. "I just showed up." "You did more than show up. You stayed. Even when we made it hard. Even when you had every reason to leave." He met her eyes. "So thank you." Lian Yue set down the dough she was kneading and crossed the kitchen. She pulled Ethan into a hug, and after a second of surprise, he hugged her back. "You're a good kid," she said. "Your ma would be proud of you." His voice was muffled against her shoulder. "You think?" "I know." When he pulled away, his eyes were wet, but he was smiling. Winter came, and with it the cold and the snow and the hard work of keeping everything alive and functioning. But the house was warmer now. Not just because they kept the fire going, but because it was full of people who cared about each other. They ate dinner together every night, talked about the day, made plans for tomorrow, argued about stupid things that didn't matter. Sam told bad jokes that made Ethan groan. Ethan told stories about things that had happened at the market in town. Caleb was quieter, but he listened, and sometimes he'd add a comment that made everyone laugh. Lian Yue sewed by the fire while they talked, her needle moving in steady rhythm, her heart full in a way she'd never imagined possible. One night, Caleb asked the boys to go check on the horses. They exchanged a look, the kind that said they knew exactly what was happening, but they went without complaint. When they were gone, Caleb turned to Lian Yue. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's dangerous." He smiled. "Probably. But I need to ask you something." "All right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, silver, with a small stone that caught the firelight. It was my grandmother's, he said. Only thing of value my family ever had. I gave it to Sarah when we got married, and when she died, I put it away. Didn't think I'd ever use it again. Lian Yue's heart was pounding. But then you showed up, Caleb continued, and you made this place feel like a home again, made me feel like a person again. And I know we've only been, whatever we are, for a few months. I know it's fast, but I also know I don't want to spend another day without you in my life. Not as a guest, not as someone who's just staying, as my wife. He held out the ring. Will you marry me? Lian Yu looked at the ring, then at him. At this man who'd chosen her when no one else would. Who'd fought for her, who'd given her a home and a family and a reason to believe she was worth something. Yes, she said. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They got married in the spring, in a small ceremony at the courthouse in Ridgemont. Margaret Chen came to stand as a witness. Morris from the general store showed up with his wife. A few neighbors who'd gotten to know Lian Yue through her sewing work. Sam and Ethan stood on either side of them, both scrubbed clean and wearing their best clothes. The judge, a different one than the man who'd dismissed her father's case, performed the ceremony. It took all of 5 minutes. No flowers, no music, no fancy dress, just two people promising to stand by each other, witnessed by the people who mattered. When it was over, Sam whooped loud enough to make everyone jump. Ethan grinned and shook Caleb's hand, then hugged Lian Yue without being asked. They went home and had a meal that Lian Yue and the boys had prepared the night before. Roast chicken, vegetables from the garden, bread that Sam had helped bake and only burned a little. It was simple, imperfect. It was theirs. 6 months after the wedding, a letter arrived. Lian Yue was in the garden when Caleb brought it out to her, his expression unreadable. It's from California, he said. Postmarked San Francisco. She took the letter, her stomach nodding. There was only one person she knew in San Francisco. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, the handwriting shaky and desperate. Sister, it read, I don't know if you'll get this. Don't know if you'll care, but I need help. Father is trying to do to me what he did to you. Says he's found a man who'll take me west. Says I owe him for raising me. I can't do it. I won't. But I don't know how to stop him. Please. If you ever cared about me, help me. Your sister, Lynn. Lian Yue read it twice, her hands shaking. Lynn. Her little sister. The one she'd left behind when she'd gotten on that wagon. The one she'd tried not to think about because thinking hurt too much. What is it? Caleb asked. She handed him the letter. He read it, his jaw tightening. He's doing it again, Lian Yue said. To her. Yeah. I have to help her. I know. She looked up at him. It'll cost money, time. We'd have to go to San Francisco, find her, maybe fight him in court again. Then that's what we do. Caleb, she's your sister. She's family. We don't leave family behind. He folded the letter and handed it back. When do we leave? Lian Yue felt tears prick her eyes. You do that? After everything? You saved my sons. You saved me. This is what family does. We show up. She kissed him, hard and grateful and full of love. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. We haven't done anything. We will. They left for San Francisco a week later. Ethan stayed behind to manage the ranch, his shoulders square with the responsibility. Sam wanted to come, but Lian Yue convinced him to stay and help his brother. We'll be back soon, she promised. You better be. Someone's got to keep Ethan from burning the place down. The journey west was long and exhausting, but Lian Yue barely noticed. Her mind was on Lynn, on what she'd find when they arrived, on whether they'd get there in time. They did. They found Lynn in the same boarding house where Lian Yue had stayed years ago, the same desperate look in her eyes that Lian Yue remembered seeing in the mirror. Their father was there too, all smiles and false concern, already making arrangements. Lian Yue walked into that room, and her father's face went white. You, he said. Me, Lian Yue agreed. And this time, you don't get to win. It took 3 weeks, another lawyer, Margaret had referred them to someone local, and another court battle. But this time, Lian Yue knew what she was doing, knew the law, knew how to fight. And she won. The judge ruled the same way the one in Reading had: fraud, coercion, unconscionable terms. Lin was declared free from any debt or obligation. Their father left the courtroom without a word, his back bent, his power broken. Lian Yue never saw him again. Lin came back to the ranch with them. She was quiet at first, overwhelmed by everything. But Sam took it upon himself to show her around, and Ethan made sure she felt welcome. "You're family now," Ethan told her. "That means you're stuck with us." Lin smiled. It was a small smile, fragile and uncertain, but it was there. Over the months that followed, she grew stronger, helped in the garden, learned to sew from Lian Yue, started talking more, laughing more, becoming the person she'd never had the chance to be. One evening, almost a year after she'd arrived, Lin found Lian Yue on the porch. "Can I ask you something?" Lin said. "Of course." "Why did you come for me? After everything. After father, after all of it. Why?" "Lian, you thought about it. Because I know what it's like to be someone's property, to think you don't have a choice. And I couldn't let you go through that if I could stop it. But you didn't have to. You had your own life, your own family. You're my family too. You always were." Lian Yue reached out and took her sister's hand. "And family doesn't leave." Lin's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me. Just live, be happy. That's enough." The seasons turned. The ranch thrived. The garden produced more than they could eat, so they sold the excess in town. Lian Yue's sewing business grew. Caleb expanded the herd. Sam and Ethan grew taller, stronger, more capable. Lin found her footing, found her voice, found herself. And through it all, Lian Yue stood at the center of it, not because she was trying to hold everything together, but because she'd learned something important. She'd learned that home wasn't a place you were given. It was a place you built, piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. It was the people who fought for you when you couldn't fight for yourself. It was the family you chose and the family who chose you back. It was standing in a dusty frontier town being rejected by everyone and having one man step forward and say, "I'll take her." It was working until your hands bled because you refused to give up. It was fighting in court for your freedom and winning because you refused to be anything less than your own person. It was saving a child's life and earning the love of a family that hadn't known they needed you. It was going back for your sister because you knew what it meant to be saved. One evening, 5 years after that day in Ridgemont when Caleb had chosen her, Lian Yue stood on the porch watching the sun set. The house was full of noise behind her. Sam and Lin arguing about something, Ethan teaching them both a card game he'd learned in town, Caleb's low voice cutting through it all with dry commentary that made everyone laugh. She smiled. She'd been the woman no one chose. The one left standing when everyone else was taken. The one people looked past and forgot. But she'd chosen herself. And in doing that, she'd built a life bigger and better than anything she could have imagined. She wasn't invisible anymore, wasn't disposable, wasn't temporary. She was Lian Yue Heil, wife, mother, sister, fighter. She was home, and that was everything.